The Islands Decolonization Forgot, and two books that underscore truths on display at the Commonwealth Summit and the U.S. election. Welcome to This Week Those Books, your rundown on books new and old that resonate with the week's big news story, and I'm Michael Macy. This week's big story: Samoa, the Pacific archipelago, divided up by Western powers at the end of the 19th century, hosts the 56-country Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. Meanwhile, its eastern half, American Samoa, languishes as a U.S. territory that doesn't even have the right to vote for president on November 5th. More than anything, 21st century Samoa symbolizes the unfinished business of colonization. Consider that the people of American Samoa are U.S. nationals, but not U.S. citizens, despite 124 years of U.S. control. And the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, attended by Britain's King Charles, is the first time in the Commonwealth's 75-year history that the gathering has been held in a developing Pacific island nation. As one of this week's books says about the West's attitude, on the one hand, the Pacific Islands are envisioned as economic and geopolitical stepping stones rather than ends in themselves. And on the other hand, they are imagined as ends of the earth or cultural limits, unencumbered by notions of sin, antithesis to the industrial worlds of economic and political modernity. The backstory: European navigators began to visit Samoa in the early 18th century, and Christian missionaries began to convert the islanders 100 years later. By the mid-19th century, Samoa became the playground for power games by the United States, Great Britain, and Germany. Local chiefs took different sides, keeping Samoa divided. Eventually, the U.S. signed a treaty allowing it to establish a naval station, while Britain and Germany also managed similar agreements. In 1899, the U.S. annexed eastern Samoa, now called American Samoa, and Germany annexed the western part. The division occurred without any consultation with the Samoans themselves. In 1914, as World War I ratcheted up, Western Samoa was occupied by troops from New Zealand, then a part of the British Empire. It would be nearly 50 years before Western Samoa achieved independence. In 1997, Western Samoa's legislature changed the country's name to Samoa. As for American Samoa, its people remain barred from birthright U.S. citizenship. In 1901, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that U.S. territories were foreign in a domestic sense and inhabited by alien races. This week's books are a critique of imperial representation of the region, known as Oceania, and a clutch of short stories about power and powerlessness in Samoa. The first is American Pacificism, Oceania in the U.S. Imagination by Paul Lyons. The late Paul Lyons, an English professor at the University of Hawaii, situates Orientalism in Oceania in this scholarly but passionately argued book. Lyon discusses the stereotypical representation of a vast region made up of thousands of islands throughout the Central and South Pacific. In his telling, Oceania becomes a place of small, insignificant islands that are culturally eccentric and the province of anthropologists because their people are conserved or confined within pre-modernity. Noting that Oceanians have become greeters for the tourist industry, he quotes an Oceanian scholar's lament that the islands have become thoroughly fetishized as icons of the exotic. That's largely because of the film South Pacific and an avalanche of tourist brochures, writes Lyons. But Herman Melville and Edgar Allan Poe also played a part in imagining an Oceania that is no more than a backdrop for U.S. ventures. And so, in relation to American national identity, the Pacific Islands emerge as places for scientific discovery, soul-saving and civilizing missions, manhood-testing adventure, nuclear testing, and eroticized furloughs between maritime work or warfare. Lyons examines U.S. cultural interaction with Oceanians within the broader anthropology of colonialism. It is usually seen, he says, as a subset of European representational practices, with the U.S. treated like the derivative paperback version to which Europe is the hardcover. In other words, the U.S. has simply continued the imperial relegation of its annexed territories along the lines set by the European colonial powers around the world in their heyday. Choice quote, "One day I was kidnapped by a band of Western philosophers." Kidnapped by Samoan poet Uparake Patea. The second book is Afakazi Woman by Lonnie Went Young. The author, who is of Samoan and Maori descent, explores the split reality of life on the islands as a colored person of mixed heritage, but more emphatically as a girl who's not from the white ruling class. The Afkazi in the title is roughly equivalent to the mixed-race Anglo-Indian from the South Asian wing of Britain's empire. Its baseline is the same, racial sorting. In these stories, just as those from British-ruled India, young girls are urged to keep out of the sun. In Oceania, they must not ruin their pelagi, white European skin, just as in South Asia, only fair is lovely in the Pacific Islands. So a Samoan woman asks her niece, "Do you want to be black like a muley? Do you want to be ugly?" And a mixed-race little girl thinks, "Nobody yells at me for playing in the sun, but the blessing of being so brown that I'm a lost cause already." Lonnie Went Young is considered one of the leading writers to take Samoa's story to a global audience, and she does. Choice quote, "Do you speak English?" the little girl asks. "Of course I speak English," I say. "Why wouldn't I?" "Some Samoans can't speak English," she says. My sister jumps in. "Yeah? Well, we're Samoans and we can speak English. Can you speak Samoan? I don't think so." The little girl shrinks in the face of our big brown girl defensive aggression. I hope you find this week those books useful, thoughtful, and a conversation starter. We're a small operation here, and your support helps keep this news literacy project going. Please support us by investing in a paid membership so that we can keep it freely accessible to our community of more than 10,000 subscribers in 114 countries. If it's not possible for you to upgrade to paid, email thisweekthosebooks@substack.com and we'll give you full access, no questions asked. And thanks for listening. See you next week at This Week, Those Books.